Every year, thousands of experts evaluate the status of animal, plant, algae, and fungi species around the world. Using a common language of assessment, they categorize each species' risk of extinction on the IUCN Red List. The Red List provides a barometer of life. And every year, the outlook gets worse. More than 31,000 species are currently threatened with extinction. Most because of human action. But human action can also reverse the Red List trend. So conservationists, governments, and communities around the world are joining forces, activating tried and tested IUCN tools in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can win the fight for our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Good afternoon, good evening, good night to everyone right around the world joining us today. My name is Jenny Gray. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Zoos Victoria and a past president of WAZA. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to 2021. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying, wow, I'm glad it's here and we're in a new year and in a new decade. This decade, we're asking the tough question: how do we change the species trajectory that we see on an ongoing basis? How do we tackle post-2020, a decade in which we change the trajectory and the outcome for species? I'm joining you from Melbourne in Australia in the middle of a sweltering summer, very different from last year's summer, on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respect to the First Nations people around the world and the people who walked the earth and cared for country. Last year, we hosted 3 panels and many of you joined us. And what we did was we asked conservationists from around the world, what's going wrong? What do they think is the root cause? And we shared ideas, stories of hope, stories of how we think we can do things better. This year, we want to ask different questions. This year, we want to really start tackling solutions. Because the decades of talking have gone, it's time for us to start taking action. And that action comes by coming together. And Reverse the Red is an idea, a collaboration, a time of change. And we thought we would start that conservation discussion with probably the most influential, I might think, conservation organization on the planet. That's the IUCN. And I'm delighted today that we're joined by the Director General of the IUCN, Bruno Oberle. Bruno, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you joining us from Switzerland, where we've shared stories of weather already. From the commissions and representing the 6 commissions of the IUCN, we have John Paul Rodríguez, who is the chair of the Species Survival Commission based in Caracas, Venezuela. Good day, John Paul.
Hello.
And from Brazil, we have Carmel Croukamp, who is the CEO of Parque das Aves, located in, I'm going to say it wrong, Iguaçu? Iguaçu. Carmel, welcome to you as well. And to everyone else, where are you joining us from? I've seen a few people, you've all got the hang of this already, from Indonesia, from Chile. We're going to see people from all over the world. Oh, Dario, nice to see you as well from Argentina. So we'll keep half an eye on where all our colleagues from around the world are joining us. But I'd like you to start with the panel. Exploring IUCN, what is this incredible organization? And Bruno, it's only fitting that we ask you to kick us off this morning to explain to us a bit about the role of IUCN, what your global presence is, and the influence that you have on the agenda that we're all trying to follow.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, and good morning, good afternoon to all of the people that participate in this webinar. I mean, most of you probably knows IUCN better than me. I have joined the organization as Director General 5 months ago, and I'm still in the very steep part of the learning curve. But IUCN, in my eyes, the one letter that characterize in the acronym that characterize IUCN is the U. We are a union. IUCN is a union. It is a union of members, non-governmental members, more than 1,000, governments, almost 100, indigenous people, and other categories of members. And being a union, it's clear the task of the union, it is to discuss together, develop together a meaning, a position, and then engage all together globally with the problem to be tackled with the same meaning. And this is what IUCN did in the past, a very influential organization that is at the beginning of most of the institutions in the field of the environmental goods. And this is what we have to make even stronger in the future. And I will come back probably with the next questions on where we will have to engage.
Welcome, Bruno. 5 months is not long, and I'm sure you're finding this a complex organization. There's no doubt that the ambitions and the scale of this union is vast. And so I hate to think what it's like to meet all your membership. That would take a little while. But the second arm of the IUCN, this really important part, John Paul, is the commissions. And there's 6 commissions. These are, you're a different kind of employee because you're actually elected, which that does my head in. I think Carmel and I are both quite happy that our employees are not elected. But can you explain a little bit about the commissions, John Paul, and this idea of being elected to serve?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. I just wanted first to warn Bruno that, you know, I've been in the IUCN for 30 years and I'm still discovering things. So 5 months is very early in that process for sure. So the commissions is a global expert network of people who voluntarily join the union and contribute their expertise to achieving our mission. The commissions cover different topics. Of course, I chair the Species Survival Commission, but you also have a commission on parks, on environmental law, on social and economic sciences and communication, and I always forget, and ecosystem management. So there are 6 commissions, 17,000 members around the world in approximately 174 countries. So we pretty much have global coverage. And the commission chairs, like myself, are elected by the IUCN members, by these members that Bruno just spoke about, NGOs, governments, indigenous people organizations, and such. So we carry the mandate elected by the members, as I said, every 4 years. The work that the commission do is approved by the General Assembly every 4 years, the mandate of our commissions. And in the case of SSC, we build all of our activities around what we call the species conservation cycle. And that is a cycle that begins with assessment of extinction risk, like the red list you saw in the video, then development of plans, and then we implement conservation action. This is all carried out by the network, and we're all very interested always in communicating what we do. The important thing here is that historically, the commissions, and especially SSC, have been seen as a source of information to help decision makers make the evidence-based policies. But over the years, our members have become more interested in conservation action, on saving species. So that's why it's so important that we think of it as a cycle where we begin by understanding the status of species, but we close the cycle by actually implementing action and improving their status. So that's in a very brief message what we do.
And I'm assuming that everyone who's joining this call understands all of the letters we're using, but maybe just SSC to expand that for anyone who doesn't know what that is.
Yeah, SSC is the Species Survival Commission. I omitted saying the entire names of all the commissions, but I will put on the chat the website where you can go and find more information on each one of us.
And when you say species survival, you're clearly not just talking the cute and cuddly, even though you have one behind you, John Paul. Species survival, you actually care about plants as well. And I think you're a bit of a fungi enthusiast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We always think of those perhaps 30 million species that inhabit Earth with us. And it's very important, not only that, but also sometimes we oversee the fact that 70% of the surface of Earth are oceans. And if you look at the size of the biosphere, the oceans represent 99% of the biosphere of the world. So maybe we shouldn't be called Earth, but we should be called ocean. It'll certainly be much more accurate.
Yeah, true. And then Carmel, I'm going to ask you to chip in. Tell us a little bit about you, the organization you run, and more importantly, why you're part of the IUCN network.
Hi, good morning, everybody. As serious institutions, right, that want credibility and that care about impact should use IUCN tools and the network. We felt that to be really genuinely useful. IUCN is the network, right? And it's the union, it's the network that unites thousands of voices and institutions fighting for biodiversity. If it seems complicated, it's because the IUCN, from sort of our experience, it also tends to be very good at being sort of grassroots. I mean, it's constituted by the participation of everybody. And of course, your voice, together with others, should also determine the direction of IUCN, right? That's what makes it continuously kind of push forward. I can give you my sort of, or people, my why, because to participate, because it might be a why for you too, right? For us, it was that there was, you know this already, Jenny, there was once a small grey dove, a species called Aves jeffroy, that lived in the Atlantic forest of Iguazu in Brazil, amongst other places, and where my institution is also located. And she went extinct, and it was silent and it was unnoticed. And when we noticed, it was too late. And if we can cue the cherry-throated tanager video, I'm just going to carry on talking, all right? Then you can see something that's actually sort of lovely. And when we started looking into the why of Aves going extinct, we realized that the extinction of Aves was part of the world's first wave of continental, as opposed to island-based, avian extinctions. And it was happening in our backyard. We have 120 upwards threatened species of bird of the Atlantic forest. There are 30 critically endangered species and subspecies. So with one individual, with 5 individuals, with 12, 22 remaining globally. The video that you just saw is from December 2020. It's the last known flock on Earth of the cherry-throated tanager, of that bird that you see on the screen. Our head of conservation says, I hope that they don't know that they're the last flock on Earth, because it's terrifying. It's very vulnerable. And we are very small, right? And this extinction crisis is big. So we had to start working across Assess, Plan, Act. It wasn't a luxury. It was, we needed to identify the lacunae, the orphan species, where efforts need to be created and people brought together or supported so that no bird goes extinct unnoticed, like Aves did. And at one point, actually, the conservation planning specialist group of IUCN, SSC, of the Species Survival Commission, stepped in, and they understood how important this was. And they started facilitating, coming over here all the time, and facilitating many workshops. together also with, in partnership often with the Brazilian government and with us. They trained many people, and the constant sort of multi-stakeholder approach, it also created a community, I would say, and together the community puts things into action and pulls each other in now to go and do things. There's a growing body of research that shows very convincingly that species that have a long-lasting plan, as long as it sticks together and goes forward into the future, they really tend not to go extinct. There's some very clear case studies about that, and think about that. As long as we hold together and make a plan and take it forward, species actually, in those circumstances, species don't tend to go extinct. We just need to sort of hold everything together.
Carmel, thank you. And I think you're right. We're talking to so many colleagues who may not be members of IUCN yet. And you're right, as serious players, this is where we should be, because this is where the serious conversations will be happening. And so trying to lift us up, and thanks for sharing the bird story again. You know, I'm an absolute sucker for a species on the brink of extinction. We just can't let animals go extinct on our watch while we still have life to fight this fight. We should be continuing to fight for those little flocks of birds. But Bruno, I'm going to ask you to bring us back up to the global level. I know you're a big thinker in a different way. Carmel and I can give you endless details on saving the last little hopping animal, for her flying animal. But let's bring it back, because while those efforts are heroic, that's not how we're going to win the war. We actually have to win it at a much bigger level. And I think one of the exciting things of having you in this role is that you actually are someone who looks at the global politics, who looks at the bigger economic situation. So let's step back a little bit and talk about that, how we conceptualize conservation and how it fits into a global agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Of course, it's a huge question, and I will start making a simple case. If bread would be for free, we would use it to heat our houses, because it would be cheap to heat our houses. Instead of buying gas or coal or wood or whatever, we would use bread because it is cheap. And this completely independently of the fact that bread is something so valuable, because the price is wrong. The price don't reflect the value that it is in the bread. And the same is with nature. Nature is for free. Nature doesn't have a price. And so everyone goes and use it and overuse it because it doesn't have to pay. And through all this single overusing, we have the pressure on nature that we know we have today. So you can use also another concept. Is a pioneer, a discoverer, will come to a new place where nobody is living. No more possible today, but imagine this as a thought experiment. He will go there, he will start cutting trees and create a house. So he will transform natural capital into built capital and house. And then in one of those houses, he will open a school and educate children. And these will create human capital, skill, knowledge. So at the basis, we have an investment. We take natural capital, we invest into build capital and into human capital. Because of this wrong price signal, in the past decades, we have taken from the natural capital for our necessities without reinvesting, without giving back, because the logic would say, okay, I am new here, I have a need, I have to build a house and create a school. But after that, I will reinvest, I will replant a forest, I will recreate and reinvesting in nature. And we don't do it. We simply don't do it. The value of the capital in the last year went down by 40%. The build capital went up by 50% and the human capital by 20%. The figure is very simple at the end of the day. So what we have to do, we have to stop overusing the natural capital, and we have to reinvest in the natural capital, recreating nature. This is where let's say at the theoretical level is very easy. Now, how can I make it? And here I have to analyze all the consumption and production patterns, and I realize that we need societies that have a new type of consumer that consume differently, that are consuming products that are built by new type of industries, that use new types of infrastructures, and the finance that goes into all this investment have to take care that these investments are not creating additional damages to nature, but have to have a positive investment in nature. And so we have to change financial market, we have to change production structure, and we have to change our own behavior in the everyday behavior. It's a huge transformation. This is the transformational change we need for the world. It is a huge endeavor. On the other side, if we don't succeed, we will hit very, very hard on a wall. And it will be very painful to get there at that speed we are on the way is. And this is the final purpose of an organization like IUCN. It is to support the members with the help of the knowledge in the commissions to develop this concept and to make pressure on the political decision makers to take the right decision. For example, in the coming COPs in Kunming, Glasgow, and the UNFCCC. I will let it here for now. We can probably continue afterwards more in detail.
But I would like to just follow that a little bit more, because what you're saying does make sense. So to stop destructive practices, to think of new ways of reinvesting in that natural capital. We seldom put back. We cut trees down, but we don't replant. We don't reinvest in this ongoing cycle. How do we hold countries to account? Because in a way, there is nowhere that countries are held to account on how they use their capital law. You know, if you commit a crime against the people in your country, you can be held to account for that. But you can destroy your natural capital, and it's almost seen as yours to destroy.
I mean, this is the task of international treaties. They try to put global regulation in place. Of course, nations will be very reluctant to accept sanctions if they don't comply with the objective. This is the reason, because the CBD is a sum of good intention, and because the UNFCCC in a way scaled down the ambition from the Kyoto Protocol that was almost compulsory into the Paris Agreement, that it is an alliance of voluntary commitments of states. Of course, with the engagement to once committed to measure and to make sure that they are delivered. It is the only way. It is the democratic discussion among the states on Earth. What it makes plausible that we could succeed at one moment, it is that the needs of people are the same everywhere. We want to eat. We want a secure food for the future. We want secure space for our families and for our children and grandchildren. We have the same sensitivity and for the beauty of nature. We have the same, let's say, curiosity for technology and good solutions. We are the same. We are humans everywhere on the world. And we can make pressure on the government where we are, that are ruling on the place where we are. And this is, again, the role of a union to suggest common standard, common objectives to all of us, all of our member organizations, independently where we are acting. And then let me, there is space on this planet that it is not under the direct jurisdiction of single states. And this could be a development in the future to make sure that that open space that don't belong to a state will be transformed in the future into a common heritage of humanity. I'm speaking about the oceans. I'm speaking about Antarctica. This is maybe a battle that we will have to start at one day.
I love that word, the common heritage of our planet. John Paul, this is a passion of yours, thinking about countries, their capacity. While we set targets like the Aichi targets at a global level, they actually end up being implemented at a country by country level. And do you want to just talk to us about why you think this country level is so important?
Yes, thank you, Jenny. So that's the main kind of driver behind Reverse the Red, is the idea that we need to strengthen the capacity of countries to implement conservation action. Now, there are many elements to this. So if you look at the IUCN's knowledge products, so the knowledge products mobilized by IUCN rather, such as the red list of species and ecosystems, key biodiversity areas, and etc., these tend to focus, develop standards and applications at the global level. So we have a good view for what the status of biodiversity is in the planet. But when you look at conservation actions, the actual saving of species, that rarely happens at the global level. Most often happens at the national level or even subnational level, where the conservation actions take place. So what we offer to do, or we're aiming to do with Reverse the Red, is to enhance national level applications of the species conservation cycle. And to do that, mobilize the massive networks of support that we have. So for example, the SSC has members on almost every country of the world. So if these members gathered and they joined forces with IUCN members in those countries, with the governments, with the zoos and aquariums and botanical gardens and other organizations locally, we could develop nodes of fantastic intellect and experience and capacity to mobilize conservation action. And that's what we are planning to do. I mean, for me, the main motivation behind all of this is that conservation works. We have a lot of experience of reversing declining species and ecosystems. There are many, many examples of cases that have succeeded when people get together and think about what is the best way to, very deliberately implement conservation action. If you look at how much money is spent on destroying nature, it's infinitely higher than the money spent on saving nature. So we just were able to tip the balance, a little bit what Bruno was saying as well along those same lines. If we tip the balance in favor of nature, nature will come back. And that's what we aim to do by enhancing these national working groups. And Carmel and Parque das Aves is helping us do that in Brazil, but there are many other examples as well that we're very happy to. Visit our website. You've seen it on the chat a couple of times, Reverse the Red, and you'll see the allies and the partners and our vision for the future.
Carmel, it sounds like John Paul's cueing you in. And so while we do need to talk for a new model, we need to build this capacity. And you've been working on building the capacity within Brazil. And please share the story of what you've been working on.
Yeah, shall we cue the video, actually, of the center? We did a little teaser trailer for the webinar. Let's see if we get it up. In the meantime, oh no, let's do it.
Over 1 million species are considered threatened with extinction globally, and many thousands of these are native to Brazil, the most biodiverse country in the world. When we know that a species is threatened and what threatens it, we can join people together to make a solid science and people-based plan and then act on it. This is the Assess, Plan, Act, and this is what we do. The Center for Species Survival Brazil is a new permanent hub for the Brazilian national territory, supporting Brazilian conservation professionals in their race to save species. Center for Species Survival Brazil. Join us.
So I guess the first thing to say is that in establishing the Center for Species Survival Brazil, we felt very palpably and pragmatically that the kind of approaches that John Paul has been talking about in the last few years, also when he listened, to his members, work very well. The Center for Species Survival Brazil is a permanent hub for the Species Survival Commission for the country of Brazil. And it exists specifically to work the species conservation cycle, assess, plan, act. So red list assessments, conservation planning, and strategic action and stimulating action for the fauna of Brazil. We work with governments, with NGOs and universities across kind of everything across the board. The center provides training in many SSC skill sets. It executes conservation planning workshops for many species every year. It creates change on the level of policy as well. The latest workshop in November, now 2020, involved 55 stakeholders, fishermen, the fishing industry, specialists, and the governments of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay that produced a collaborative tri-national strategy to save the threatened sand tiger shark, for example.
And so, I mean, this really is the plan that we're talking about in Reverse the Red. And Carmel, you've just sort of summarized it in just a few minutes and fantastic comments coming in on that. But it does come down to, Bruno, almost taking the stance that if I try to merge this top-down, bottom-up approach that are we coming back with together, of if we didn't count the money in your bank account ever, you would never be rich. You need to know what you have. And so that's the assess stage, as I understand it, knowing what we've got. Then you know what the threats are, so you can do this conservation planning and then act together jointly with some urgency around it. And it seems like such an obvious option, but it's really hard to get going. And Carmel, to bring so many players together, to bring the expertise together, have you found this difficult, or is it unbelievably easy when you give people a vision and a place to rally?
No, it hasn't been necessarily easy, and actually we are only sort of publicly launching the center as in creating an online presence, creating sort of public-facing materials. Now we've been operating for over a year, and that's been for a very specific reason. We want to take time, not come and launch ourselves into the country of Brazil, but to, over a whole process of time while we were working, introduce ourselves to the community, but also know our community and these kind of needs. When you look at through this prism, right, of assess and plan and act, how hard it is depends on your objective. And it's worthwhile taking time to build strategy. We started by hearing from NGOs and government conservation professionals about different professional needs, and thinking very carefully about how policy works, and also how policy works on the human level, and about what Brazil has. Because what Brazil has in terms of nature conservation and assess, plan, act is formidable, right? And together with everybody, we built a strategy tailored to this. So I'll to give you an example. We're here to support, assess, plan, act cycles for Brazil, right? So now for many centers, absolutely appropriately, quite rightly, a standard approach to putting in the red list component of a national center would be to train and employ red list officers to get more species native to a country or associated with a territory onto the global red list. And this, of course, would have been tremendously inefficient and actually possibly disrespectful to do in the case of Brazil. Brazil already has an excellent national list of endangered species. However, the Brazilian list and the global red list don't converse. To understand the scale of the significance of that, the Brazilian list lists 5,766 total endemic species of fauna that only exist in Brazil. 4,420 of these are not on the global red list. And probably something which is possibly more also useful and revealing is that 37% of all the endemics that are present on both lists, the Brazilian list and the global red list, have a discrepant threat classification. So this list says it's endangered, this list says it's vulnerable, for example. And what that actually means, so in Brazil, for the Brazilian government red list, you have about 1,500 specialists, right, to produce the Brazilian red list. And the data of these 1,500 people isn't being sort of naturally fed into the global red list. So we took a different and sort of, it felt like a more ambitious tactic, and that's because it felt terrifying, frankly. Also, I've used that word twice now, but it did, which was to negotiate an agreement between the Brazilian government and IUCN SSC in order to harmonize these processes and to be able to exchange information. And this was a Herculean effort of many people across the board. So by now, March 2021, 76 Brazilian civil servants, these are the government coordinators, the workshop leaders for the Brazilian red list, will have completed training in red list methodology with the latest 2019 update. And that is hopefully going to result in a big gain for the global red list, for the species, and also for the voices of Brazilian science and specialists to be heard. So my advice would be, listen to many people and be clear about your purpose, because your purpose is to save species. Your purpose is not carrying out activities, right? So focus on impact and listen to what John Paul says as well. You should do that.
Thank you, Carmel. And I'm trying now to really blend, but I'm going to take a couple of questions that are coming through to me. And it really is, it's quite interesting because we're dealing so much at this detailed level down at a species by species, but yet to actually stop the trajectory, we need to go back to what Bruno said. How do we rethink our economies? How do we rethink our behaviors? And as we see it coming through, habitat destruction, there's so many destructive practices. So a question for you, Bruno, that comes from our audience says, I assume that what you're talking about will require the building of a new economic relationships, policies, institutional transformation, including a more engaged civil society in the decision-making process. How do we start those dialogues, and what role do we see IUCN and Reverse the Red playing in that?
But the two approaches, right? The species protection and restoration approach, and the more global analysis that I was offering, they fit very nicely together. On one side, if I look, I start on my language, and I will end on the other one. If we see what we are investing at the global level, all these investments are causing, or most of those investments are causing destruction in nature. So it is on one side, we have to make sure that in future, investment in the needs of humanity are done in a way that doesn't produce negative impact on nature. And this is the big bulk of the money flow, 99%. And then we have another 1%, and this is the money that is directly invested in nature to rebuild that natural capital. So, and here we need to have more money going there into rebuilding the natural capital. And rebuilding natural capital means, among others, all the activities that Carmel and John Paul were speaking about. It is the reason why we ask in the coming COP of the CBD, we ask for an ambitious level on protected area of 30%. Because if we don't have the space where species can be supported, it will not work. And we are asking, on the other side, substantial investment into the protection of species as the two legs on which the conservation should work in the future. This is the investment. And the other one, it is don't produce additional harm. And here is an initiative that we are preparing. We are asking states to invest a substantial part of the recovery money in activities that are creating directly value for nature. We have a lot of avenues where the recovery money could go into managing better protected areas, into creating a more healthy agriculture, healthy in the sense of better food and better relation to nature. And to come to your final question, how we can link this, how we can transform the question of the colleague that we're listening. How can we relate this change? Well, we can support these changes. Changes are happening because you see a future, a different future. Antes que crear un mundo nuevo, tiene que soñarlo primero. It is, I guess it is Machado. So we have to see a different future and create working on the ground, for example, like Carmel is describing. It is a way to see a different world in the future. And these people will be ready to engage also at the big level, at the level of the political action, at the level of the financial action, supporting the right decision. So seeing the future, a better future in your actions today, this is the link.
I think another link and another question that's come through is that climate change appears to be overshadowing the discussions around species survival. And we've talked about this a little bit, John Paul, but actually I would really want to say that we should be linking these together, because it actually, the same destructive practices you're talking about are the ones that are driving the climate change, are the same ones that are driving species into trouble. And I really think, and we've said this in Reverse the Red, that like the union, what we actually don't need is to divide anymore. What we need is to bring together all the skills, all the debate, whether it's around behavior change, bringing the science, and climate change is the same part of that. How do you think of that, John Paul, and the big changes, the community-led changes that we need to see happening?
Yeah, when you look at the red list, there are very few species that have their status is due to climate change, or they're documented, or their threat is defined, climate change is their main threat. And the reason for that is that the time scale of climate change is a bit slower than the time scale of other threats, such as overexploitation and habitat destruction. So when you look at the threats to species, it's more immediate things, the ones that we document more visibly. But climate change for sure is changing, and you can see the impact in the oceans, for example, with corals. It's one of the most visible in terms of species declines that we have documented. But the important thing is that all of these threats operate synergistically, they operate together. None of them is independent. Most species have 3 or 4 threats that determine their current status. So we have to think of climate change as another threat that needs to be mitigated as well, that operates at a slightly different time scale, but is also a consequence of human actions. So when you look at, I mean, for me, and I mentioned at the beginning, I'm having an ocean day. I mentioned at the beginning the importance of oceans in the SSC and the IUCN species. And it's because it is, most of the declines are unseen, they're underwater, let's say. They're not the same, they're not as evident as a deforestation of a forest. But overexploitation of natural resources is a major threat. The more that we look at things like trees and we look at ocean species, we find that overexploitation, our direct use of species, is a major driver of declines. And what the red list allows us to do is to see that, is to see the more species that we assess, the better our knowledge at the national level, like Carmel is leading, gets, then our actions that are targeted on recovering species get better. And that's what we aim to do over time, is to improve our knowledge base, not for knowledge's sake, but to guide our actions.
Thank you. I'm getting tons of questions through and they're really good. And I think all of them, we may have to book this panel back for another hour just to answer all the questions. But I'm going to persevere with just a few more lines of thought, because the year ahead is a really interesting year. There's hopefully an easing, there's more travel, there's more discussions coming. But equally, we're seeing groups get more engaged. If anything has shown us is that we actually can work together when we need to. And so, Carmel, as we start engaging communities, you've done quite a bit of that work as well as we have. This really powerful message, and you started this discussion, Bruno, with this idea of we should be seeing a future that's different from the past. And how do we see these events that are coming up changing that? And Carmel, some of the tools that we do use to engage people to make a difference.
But actually, also hooking into what John Paul was to say, and reading some of the really interesting questions and commentaries, and that also it makes me think about Brazil as well. And in Brazil, and this is something that everybody will recognize all over the place. In Brazil, we are of course very concerned with popularist ideologies right now, and they really shoot across the bow a lot when we're trying to engage people, and especially when we're trying to engage people with policy and in terms of voting. They complicate things. In today's polarized environments, issues can kind of become tagged, right, or associated with one side of the political divide. They're these kind of ideological trigger issues. I mean, probably in Brazil at this point, just the environment is an ideological trigger issue. You like on one side or the other, you're the, yeah, you know, it sort of has this huge general tag on it. Sometimes we feel powerless in the face of this, and because there's huge forces, dynamics at work, and we probably are powerless. But there probably still are issues of legislation and policy and voting that, when you maybe sometimes put them in specific enough ways, and you find this often when you're talking face to face with people as well, and people from a broad spectrum do care about. And we see that all the time. And one of my favorite examples, and that I'm bringing in to hook up to what John Paul was talking about, and was this: a few years ago, I think there was an attempt to take away the legal protection of all Brazilian threatened species. So this is the Brazilian red list as it is written into law to protect those species, which is a strong thing for Brazil. This law proposal came out on a Friday, and we waited a couple of days, and we kind of saw that there wasn't any, we weren't hearing any noise about this. And so on a Monday, we put together a coalition of NGOs, and then we all start putting a lot of staff on this issue to generate strong social media materials and multilingual petitions, lots of things. We wanted this to be like a strong, quick response to kind of actually leverage the fact that the red list is a really nerdy thing, right? It's a really nerdy thing. It's really hard to describe what it is. And that's why they kind of thought that people wouldn't care. But people did care. By the way, when we wrote to WASA and amongst other international institutions, WASA wrote a formal note about this within 2 days, very quickly as well. 5 days into this campaign. So on the Monday, we formed this campaign. On the Friday, the senator withdrew his law proposal, citing social media pressure. They didn't know people would care. They thought people wouldn't care. And that's why they were prepared to do it, because it was a thing they thought that there would be an overwhelming positive, and the negative was kind of too sort of nerdy, actually, as well, right? To care about, if you know what I mean. This isn't a key factor in some issues, as I've said, but it is a key factor in many issues. It is. And it's also important that even in these huge dynamics and in our powerlessness often, it's important to remember that when people from the public, when members of the public feel they can win on these things, it becomes addictive and empowering for them. And so we shouldn't give up on these kind of efforts. The engaging the public on policy for that reason also, no matter what, you know, our difficult country circumstances might be. And I guess I'll also add that this was my first encounter with the red list, and understanding how precious and fragile a red list is, and that it means protagonism. And I became addicted to this. So this first encounter at that stage, it turned into sort of, you know, one of the loves of my life, actually. And I think that happens to people, right? Yeah.
That's such a great segue to our next seminar. So our next webinar, we're inviting 4 communication experts to talk about social change and engaging with communities. And I'm even more worried that their hour's not going to be enough. But I wanted to, as we're getting towards the end of our hour, come back to Bruno and John Paul and talk about the World Conservation Congress. That's coming up later this year. We've had a year break from when we thought we were doing that. But what are you hoping that will come out of that Congress? What will we be trying to change as we move forward in this coming decade? And perhaps starting with you, Bruno.
But what we need, it is a clear framework that covers all the action that are needed. We need an ambitious framework, and we need a framework that it can be measured. We need quantitative targets. This is the reason because we say 30% of the planet should be protected, in particular zones that are very rich on biodiversity. So this is, in a way, this is the main decision that I am expecting, in particular now from the CBD. At the same time, I am expecting that governments use the occasion that the recovery from the COVID is giving to learn how to invest differently, public investment, public money, and to carry on then on these experience and transport this in the normal after the COVID. I mean, we are spending, and I mean humanities and governments, we are spending every year 5 trillions, 5,000 billions of US dollars in subsidies that are negative, they impact negative on nature. Yeah. And this is subsidies for other activities that are distributed in a way that it is, and this has to stop. Community, collectivity have to learn how to continue progressing towards the SDGs, towards the objectives that we have, that we all have decided, in a way that doesn't create problems with the commons, climate, biodiversity, fertility of the soils. We have to go in that direction. It is harnessing the financial world in the right way so that the money is spent rightly. And then I hope that we can also invest much more into education and to preparing the next generation of leaders and of citizens to evaluate and understand better the value of nature, so that we don't need such kind of crisis intervention that we have to make now, because they will understand how important it is to have high capital, to have a beautiful nature.
What a great answer, that umbrella approach, bringing us all together under this one really cohesive goal. John Paul, your view for the year ahead, what are you hoping we'll be able to achieve?
Well, for me, the World Conservation Congress is the best conservation meeting that exists. And that is very clear because it is a space for the voice of members to be heard. I mean, I always think about, being at the assembly of IUCN, the General Assembly of Members, and having, a representative from an IPO, Indigenous Peoples Organization, a small organization, possibly very informal in a remote part of the world, sitting alongside the European delegation, a powerhouse delegation, with extremely trained high-level experts with lots of experience in international deals, sitting together next to each other with practically the same voice, practically an equal presence. I mean, that doesn't happen in any other forum in the conservation of the world. For me, I have a conservation organization called Provita that I co-founded, and where the SSC is based here in Caracas. Provita has been participating in the Congress for 30 years. And it's amazing that an organization like ours has been able to influence IUCN policy at the global level through our ideas, through the resolutions. I see in the chat people talking about resolutions. Resolutions and recommendations are the way that members, IUCN members, can change the world, the global landscape, policy landscape. I mean, that is just fantastic. And I really encourage everyone to go. I hope that we can have this World Conservation Congress in person in Marseille. We're all counting on it. We have our fingers crossed. But if not, there will be many ways to participate. And there'll be other congresses in the future where you can go in person. And for me, they are, they happen every 4 years, like the Olympics. And they are the Conservation Olympics, where you really get a sense, get the pulse of what is happening everywhere in the world, and you get to make a difference as an IUCN member, as a commission member, or as a participant. So please engage. It's a great place.
So thank you all tremendously for this participation. We also do have a Reverse the Red pavilion. So Bruno, I'm expecting to host you there and share a glass of wine while we talk about saving the world some more. Thank you so much, Bruno, Carmel, and John Paul, for joining me this evening to continue this discussion. I am severely sorry that we are ending now because there are so many incredible questions, but I think the team between Kira and Bibiana and various other people have been answering them as they go. But really great to hear these views. I think the future is something we can change. There is a vision of a better future, one in which we reverse the trends that we have been seeing. I'd like to also particularly thank Smithsonian, who host this event for us each time, and to welcome everybody to the next 3 that are coming up. The next one is on communication. The one after that will be sharing stories of success, where we have reversed the red trends. And finally, we're looking to bring some real heavy hitters together to talk about changing behaviors. And we always talk about changing community behaviors. Bruno, the discussion I want is, how do we change CEO behaviors? Because actually we need to change from the top as well as from the bottom as we come together. Thank you all for a wonderful time. I promise you to get out a minute early, Bruno. I'm meeting that promise. Thank you, everyone. Good night. And I look forward to seeing you all on the 3rd of March for the 3rd of March for the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny, for wonderful moderation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jenny. Bye-bye.